So Chris, this week on the show, we got V3 of ElevenLabs.
We did indeed, Mike. And we were too average to even train our voices. So this segment now is probably not going to make any sense at all.
I really should have just trained our voices. But anyway, we ran out of time. And I think it still shows just how far ElevenLabs has come. I mean, it seems like anyone could add an AI podcast type thing to their show now. Our days are numbered. Although I'm not sure if with the voice training, I am the problem or it's the problem. Does this even sound like me? Is that even how I laugh? How did I get in here? Wait, Moshi, is that you? So Chris, this week we're talking about Moshi. No!
Are you okay? I still can't believe I'm still this guy.
Yeah, sorry. I was just trying to test out all these emotes it can do. G'day, mate. Throw another shrimp on the barbie. All right, roll the music.
So, Chris, this week we have been playing around a little bit with the new ElevenLabs V3, which we heard at the top of the show there. And apart from that being like really creepy and weird and probably blowing out people's ears and scaring their children in cars or wherever they're listening, I was trying to demonstrate the new emote technology in ElevenLabs V3, where you can essentially put in these tags and tell it to, be emotional and things like that.
Yeah, Microsoft's had that for a while in their voice one where you can put the emotion tags, but this seems to actually adhere to them a lot better. I mean, I wouldn't say that's the best voice clone I've ever heard. It really didn't sound like you much at all. But the actual emotions, like its ability to follow those is really cool. And it actually gave me the thought while I was listening to it. Imagine putting in like an entire Shakespearean play or something like that with emotions and getting it to like do an entire act or something like that.
Yeah, for me, to be fair to them, it is an alpha, and they do warn when you use it that voice clones will not work well with it. So I think that to judge the voice clone as part of that is just doesn't make a ton of sense. So yeah. The other voices I think do, and they are quite emotive and expressive. The interesting thing is I obviously tried that a few times, and the first voice you hear, the female voice at the start, that voice was a lot better in many of the recordings, but I just took the worst one because the second part of it was better. So I'm sure if you were willing to spend the time cutting it up, especially if you were doing like an audio book or, you actually edited your podcast audio like we probably should, then, you could get some pretty amazing results from it. And I think the big breakthrough with this model and why I thought it was worth talking about is this idea of the two speakers having a conversation and then the emotes kind of matching up in that conversation. It just makes it feel and sound way more realistic.
Imagine the poor person who did like the Wuthering Heights audiobook being like, oh my God, I spent so long on that. And now a computer can just do it in 15 minutes.
Yeah, it's like I learned how to pronounce every word and now it's ruined. But the other thing is, you would know this really well having used it a fair bit, but if you write like ha in, often AI would struggle, especially the voice models picking that up. So it would literally say ha. But now, it obviously laughs. You can put things like I've got up on the screen now in brackets whispering before some text, and then it'll obviously whisper it. You can give it cues like dramatically. But what I think is the coolest part of it is you can put the entire script in, right, and designate the voices. But then they have an automatic mode in their user interface where you can say, add all the emotes for me based on the text. You don't even need to go and do it.
That's impressive. And that's probably what's needed in these larger things of text. And you're right. Anytime I've done text to speech, I've had to have these big search and replace things or get the AI, like an AI model, an LLM to do it, where it's like, instead of saying this, say this. Instead of this acronym, pronounce it. Even the word AI itself, it's like say A, like a pirate, AYE, EYE, like AI, IMERities, like that kind of thing. And this model seems to overcome those natively, which is an impressive improvement.
It seems to excel to me at sort of maybe like the notebook LLM style podcasts, right? Or an audio book or reading a news article. I think that's where it's best for. Actually, having based on some of our phone call experiments, it probably would work fine. But I still think you can tell if you're listening to the raw audio that it's not human. Like it still feels a bit synthetic.
My attitude is changing on this, though. I think that in a lot of cases, it's kind of like, okay, like if people know that it's AI on a phone call, it's still like an agent for you. It's still representing you. It's still accomplishing a task. And so it isn't necessarily the worst thing that people recognize it's AI, but the better it is, the more pleasant their experience is in dealing with it.
It felt like then you just said AI like the AI did for some reason to me. I don't know if that's true or not, but maybe. So it's interesting. You can play around with it on their website. They have some examples, and you can also just sign up for an account on ElevenLabs and play around with it. You get a number of free credits. It's definitely worth trying out, and a pretty cool improvement from the previous models that I've tried. ElevenLabs is a pretty nuts company. They release stuff all the time, and we rarely cover it on the show because they just release so many different things. And some of them aren't that interesting unless you're really into audio. But I thought this model, or this alpha of a new model, is so impressive that it was definitely, worth talking about.
There is a lot of voice models around, but they always seem to be right up there in terms of the quality. They also have a bunch of turbo models and much quicker ones for live audio. So that's like in the phone call scenarios and things like that. So you lose a bit of quality on the voice, but you get that speed. So you don't have that massive latency waiting for it to generate. But generally speaking, they're fast anyway. Like they're really good.
So look, I don't want to take a victory lap here, but if I am taking a victory lap, I think I might have helped drive down the price of OpenAI's o3 model. I posted when it first came out, and I was playing around with it a fair bit. The speed of o3 is contagious, albeit for a hefty price, but I like you so far. Now, keep in mind, this was, I think this was even maybe before, if I'm remembering correctly, the Gemini 2.5 Pro pricing was even out. Like there was that period where it was just free. And so it was hard to compare it at the time. But then when o3 finally shipped and then you saw that price comparison, it just started to not make any sense.
That's right, especially when it was rating lower. But everyone was talking about how good it was at tool calls. And I did have good experiences working with o3 prior to Gemini coming out.
Yeah, I've thought it's a really good model. I think it excels when it's connected to tool calling in its thinking steps. I don't think it's as good when it's raw. And it seems to rely on that thinking and that tool calling in that process to be a better model. Whereas I think out of the box, Gemini 2.5 Pro is just a better model than it. And it was a lot cheaper, significantly cheaper. But sneakily, OpenAI this week really just slammed the price down on it. And this is the strangest part of this whole thing, right? It's now cheaper than GPT-4o. And I don't even know how to make sense of it. For comparison, input tokens on GPT-4o is $2.50 per million. And on o3, it's now $2 per million. So it's 50 cents cheaper. And then on the output side, it's $8 per million tokens, and GPT-4o is $10 per million.
I mean, it makes it so useful that you can use it for everyday, like utility operations, like as an API call in regular software. There's a lot of things that opens up when it's at that price.
Yeah, and I'm not sure. Do you think the strategy here is to just detract from the other models, like the Sonnets and the Gemini 2.5 Pros?
Maybe they just did it because they can. They might have always intended on making it cheaper. Some people have speculated that they quantized it, which means like discarding some of the values along in the...
They came out and denied that, though. They said it's the exact same model. So that's been disproven already.
Oh, well, it's impressive. And I think when we see the weakness on the new Anthropic models in terms of speed and availability, updates like this are really significant because you can actually use them at scale. So I think that it's really good, and we're definitely putting new eyes on it for that exact reason, especially because our emphasis lately is around the tool calling and MCP work. So having a model that's both fast and has a propensity to use those tools and is a reasonable price is just such a great spot to be in. I really think this is the future of how we're going to use LLM. So a model that plays into that is really valuable.
What's also intriguing about this strategy is, o1-pro basically was just completely unaffordable, so no one ever really used it outside of the walls of ChatGPT. That was $150 per million input and $600 per million output. Like, just completely unaffordable to even test in your app. But then you've got o3-pro, $20 per million in, $80 per million out. Still crazy expensive in my opinion for what it is, but significantly cheaper that you can actually afford to maybe give it a whirl.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that price drop has been really exciting, having a pro model that doesn't make you feel like you're losing half your spleen every time you send a request. And so I'm actually willing to give it a go, because there's some models where, like the o3-pro, where it just wasn't giving better answers necessarily to a degree where I would give it enough time to give it a chance. Whereas o3-pro, the pricing is at a level where you can actually give it a chance. I still think, though, the time it takes to get a reasonable response means it's a totally different way of working. It's got to be like a sort of set and forget style request, like we've talked about before, where you give it a far more complicated task with a lot more context, tool call abilities, set it off on its way, and then come back later when it's finished, rather than being an interactive, ongoing conversation. And I think that's why they've structured it like that. It really is a single shot, big job, your hardest problems kind of model, not a day-to-day driver where you're just working with it all day.
And I think it's why they've identified correctly they need to move to this AI system where, at least in their own interface with ChatGPT, it's going off and figuring out, okay, this is a sort of background task, something I need to do a lot of work on. I'm going to go use o3-pro. This is just a chat conversation. I'm going to use GPT-4o. Obviously, we haven't seen them do this yet, but I think this is what's going to come, right? Like, because the challenge right now is knowing when to use the model, how to use it. Like, you've really got to retrain to use a model like this and really think about your prompts. Because if you just are like, hey, as some people did on Sim Theory, it's quite expensive to get a response.
Yes, and I actually saw this criticism on Reddit earlier today, someone saying it took 2 minutes to reply to me saying hi to it. And I think that that's not a correct or fair test, because that's not what it's designed to do. It's not trying to compete with a chat model that's meant to be snappy and get back and stream the token so smoothly like Grok does, for example. It's designed to do it the hard way, do everything the hard way and not miss small details. So it's just going to take longer. And I think that when you look at that paradigm of, okay, I'm going to give it all of the information it needs, or at least access to all of the tools to gather all of the information it needs, and I want one perfect answer, then this model is very suited to that. And I think in our early testing, and certainly my testing this week, I've seen it give some really excellent answers to difficult problems. And I think, as you're going to point out, really good responses. Like, it isn't trying to like write the entire Wikipedia out for you and things like that. It's actually focused on the answer and its logic to get to that answer when it replies to you.
Yeah, and this, I mean, I've already said this to you when we were playing around with it earlier in the week, but my biggest frustration with o1 and even slightly o3 was the tunes of them, where they would just spit out these essays of data, almost like trying to show off that they could just output so many tokens and so much data, and they were so smart. And it does feel like with o3-pro, the tune is just so different. It sort of cuts through the noise and gives you these precision answers. And, you know, maybe some of the time, look, they're really wrong, especially some of the coding things I've put it through where I'm like, I waited ages and this is just blatantly false. But then other times it could cut through things where I was shocked, and it would just be like, this is the problem. It's just here, just change this line or whatever it is. And I have some other examples as well where I've also, you know, tested it with other things, as we'll do in a minute, my new book test, which I'm really excited about. The challenge, though, I have with this model is it's sort of like going back to, like we were talking about last week, like a 486 computer when I have the Pentium now, because of that context window. Like a 200K context window for me now, it's too small. I want my 1 million context.
That's true. I did a couple of experiments this morning, which I often do with new models, which is horse races. And I kind of had lost faith in doing that as a test, because they all tend to give roughly the same answer. And there isn't a lot of clever thinking in there. They're basically looking at the horse that has the highest rating and has the best write-up in the information you give it. So it's just not that valuable. Like, it'll often pick the winners, but I've started to kind of come to the conclusion that's just a coincidence, because the people doing the commentary usually get it roughly right? And so this morning, 2 races in a row, it picked a non-favorite and won I actually picked races that had already taken place so I could quickly know the result. And the other models, so Sonnet and Gemini, just picked the really obvious like highest rated horse and lost. And so I was all set to come on here and be like, oh my God, I found the holy grail here. I'm going to be a millionaire from this horse racing thing. And then the very next race it lost. And so I'm like, okay, maybe not. But what I did find interesting, and I don't know if it's sort of like a barometer proxy for the way the model works, is that it picked this non-obvious answer. It just felt like it wasn't shortcutting. It actually thought it through and came to its own conclusion based on the information. And I've noticed that as well. I've started to use it with MCP tool calling, and its approach and the things it searches for are distinctly different to what I see with, say, it actually takes the time to construct much more robust queries and interprets the results of those in a more methodical way, let's say. Like its whole style of answering an output seems different. Like it seems, I don't know what the right word is. Do you know what I mean?
I agree with you. I don't even think it's comparable to O3. Like it doesn't seem like, to me, when I use it, the same model. I think a lot of people tried to just get it to just output raw code and use it as a coding model. And I would say to people doing that, stop, because you're wasting your time, your money, everything. It's just not great at it. Like it's an answer engine that uses heavy compute to give you a sort of a cut through response. I think that's in your toolkit as a model. That's where it sits to me right now. Like I need a breakthrough answer here. I need a cut through answer.
And it's funny you say that, because this is how I often work with Gemini 2.5. I've got Patricia going on Gemini 2.5, and I'll be like, listen here, stop mucking around and just give me a one-line answer to what this thing is. And I don't say mucking around. I'm usually ruder than that. And I'd say, I want a precision answer. I always use the word precision. A precision answer. Don't rewrite anything. Just tell me what the answer is. And I don't always work like that. But when I do, it is remarkable how often it'll just go, here's the line here. I can't believe I didn't think of this earlier. And it seems to me like O3-pro sort of does that out of the box without you needing to specify that.
There is one limitation in Gemini 2.5 Pro right now where it falls into this problem from other models. It goes down one path so strongly, it gets caught up in it. And then you often will switch model with and then reintroduce the context. And you'll be like, oh, wow, the new Claude 4 Sonnet's amazing. It's so much better. And then you realize, no, I just reframed the problem and got it out of that doom path. And so I think with the doom pathing, O3-pro, at least in my experience, doesn't fall into the doom path because it's so slow it can't. Like you can't get it down the doom path.
Yes, and we've talked about this before, and this is why we think that the idea of threading and going off in a different thread is so important in future interfaces, because you get the context into a point where you don't want to accidentally send it down the doom path, as you say. And I often will do that out of laziness or whatever, and then be like, oh, if only I could go back to where I was earlier because that context was working great. So totally get what you're saying. But yeah, the slower speed makes that harder.
And that's the thing, working in a more async way. You can have the hardest problem you're working on where you really do need to cut through the noise, you know, in one tab with like an O3-pro going and spinning, and you're like, I'm going to leave that to bake like a cake. Yeah. And then I'm going to go back to my sort of day-to-day model where I'm triaging through other things that I might be working on with it. And so I think that works well. I do think, though, in a weird sense, O3-pro leans so heavily, though, into tool calling to extract the best value out of the model.
Yes, and I think something that we definitely noticed in our testing of O3-pro is it seems to need more direction when it comes to the tool calling than other models do. And I think this is probably going to be, as you pointed out to me, something that we need to learn over time is what specific model instructions do we need to get it to know, you know, when it's worth doing hardcore research, when it's worth calling 20 tools instead of just 2, and pushing it in the right direction in terms of that. And O3-pro, just right off the bat, for me, seemed like it was more inclined to try to answer the question itself rather than to go off and use a whole bunch of tools. And I really had to nudge it in that direction. And I personally feel like it's going to do better with a lot more. And so that requires overriding the prompting to get it to do that. And I don't know, obviously people have spent more time with it than me, but I really feel like this is going to be the next sort of prompt engineering style challenge is how hard do you work on this? What mix of tools do you need to tell it is required in order for it to answer your question? Because if you don't, you could be writing off a model saying it's no good when a slightly different approach using the same model gives a vastly superior answer and better than the other models in total. You know what I mean?
I think it's worth explaining because a lot of our audience wouldn't know how MCP support factors into these tool callings, right? Like we don't necessarily know that OpenAI is using an MCP layer in that thinking step. You could assume maybe they are, but like, can you explain how that's working now in the different approaches? I think that's an interesting way of looking at these models.
There's several approaches, and I think it's one of these things where people are still working out the best approach. But let's talk about OpenAI and o3-pro specifically. You can either provide it with an MCP server. And so an MCP server is basically a system that says, I have these tools available to me. So let's look at, say, a Google search MCP. The Google search might say, I have a tool which is search Google, right? Then you might have another one which is, say, ElevenLabs, generate audio. Like I can do text to speech, I can do speech to text, and I can do one other thing. And so those tools then through the MCP server, OpenAI goes, okay, I'll hit up that MCP server, ask it what tools it has available. And as you pointed out, Mike, it can ask more than that. It can say, give me some sample prompts, give me a search endpoint that allows me to search through the tools. And it can have other properties, like, for example, a schema of like the parameters and what they mean, for example. And so they query the server, and then they have their own proprietary technique they're using, which will then use those tools. So that's one way. And the downside of that way is your MCP server needs to be hosted publicly in a way that the OpenAI can access it over the open internet, right? So it just has to be able to access it publicly. And you can optionally provide credentials to that so it can log in with an API key, something like that, right? The downside of that is a lot of MCPs right now don't work in that SSE public mode. They were designed for Claude Desktop. So they actually work in like this standard input-output mode, i.e. designed to work on a computer. So the downside of providing the MCPs direct to OpenAI is you can't get them all. And the ones you can get need to be hosted somewhere with credentials. So it's a lot of work, basically, to get them in that mode.
Do you think, though, this is the mode everyone will move to now, though?
Yes. So I predict that'll be all of them in the long run, is they'll all be hosted through, like they'll be on Cloudflare or Amazon or something like that, or there'll be proprietary services pop up where they'll host your MCPs for you and have an auth layer and a user roles and permissions layer and all that. That's my prediction. But for now, the second way to do it, which is what we've been testing with, is basically you have the MCP servers that you control yourself and host yourself. And what you do is you give the list of tool calls available from your MCP servers to the model. So rather than giving it an MCP server where it has to go off and discover the tools, you tell it, here's my 30 tools. And those 30 tools might be across 4 or 5 different MCPs that you're hosting yourself. So in the first case where it has the MCP server, OpenAI will do all of the tool calls internally as part of its own process. So it doesn't come back to you and say, please call this tool. It just does it itself through the MCP server. In the second scenario where you give it the list of tool calls, the model will come back to you and say, can you please run this tool and tell me how that goes, please, bro? And then you run the tool and then you send the result back, and then it decides, okay, now that Google search, say, is finished, do I want to call another tool and search again, or call something else, call Perplexity or something like that? Or am I done? Can I answer the question now? And in that scenario too, it's still up to the model if it keeps going or if it just answers the question. So the net result should be roughly the same. They're just two different approaches to doing it. I kind of like the approach where you give it the tools, because you can then be selective about which tools you give it, for example, to direct it a bit more. And also you see what's going on throughout the process. Like you see that it's decided, okay, I haven't got enough info, I'm going to go and do this. And so I think this is an area that no one has quite figured out what the best solution is there. Like, do you intervene along the process and check how it's going and give it further direction, or do you just allow it to play out? Do you call a different model halfway through if you detect that it's going in the wrong direction? There's so many possibilities there to get the best possible result.
And we've seen the new Claude 4 series. They can do like the async tool calling, where they can be calling many tools in that mode at once. And that seems like yet another approach in a way to just do more at the same time.
Agreed. The parallel tool calling, I think, is a vastly superior way to do it. So what happens there is when the system comes back to you, instead of saying, please call this one tool and get back to me, it's like, call these 7 tools and then get back to me with all of the results. And then I'll decide what to do after that. So obviously that's faster, assuming your system can do them all at the same time. And it's also more comprehensive because the model is like, well, I've got all these available, I might as well use them all and see how I go. But again, I really feel like it comes back to a little bit of prompt engineering where you say, okay, I don't want you to ever answer me unless you use all of the systems available to you. Like, I want you to do everything you possibly can to, say I'm researching a stock, right? It's like, well, I want you to search the finance MCP. I want you to search Google. I want you to search Perplexity. I want you to search for papers in this area. I want you to search Reddit. I want you to search, like whatever, Twitter. Go through everything, compile a full massive context, and then answer my question. But then you might be like, hey, what's the weather going to be like in my area today? And you don't want it searching 35 sources and the meteorological research and all this sort of stuff. So I really feel like there needs to be ways that you can, either the model's smart enough to gauge how deep to go, or you have some level of control over that, so it's doing what you really want. But obviously the exciting part is the first example I gave, where you can be like, I've got all of these different MCPs and I want you to go hard and take as long as you need. But when I get this answer, I want the most well-researched, backed up answer you can possibly give from this massive variety of sources.
And I think it's important to call out, like, ChatGPT's connector interface to MCPs right now are a little bit different to what maybe Claude, Sonnet, and Opus are doing, in the sense that they require these special sort of connector tools. One of them being search and fetch are both required. And if you don't implement their way of doing it, they actually put up an error. This MCP server doesn't implement our specification, which is kind of interesting because Model Context Protocol is meant to be an open specification.
And this is actually a much bigger problem than you think, because what I've found is a lot of the MCP servers that are available are sort of first efforts. Someone spent an afternoon smashing it out, because a lot of them are just thin layers over an existing API that someone does. So let's say it's the Xero, the finance accounting one. Someone's just taken the Xero API and mapped it to the MCP protocol so you can use it through that method. But it doesn't implement all of the parts of the MCP protocol. So the second you try to use it with OpenAI, it's going to fail because it doesn't do that. And then the second problem is what I mentioned earlier, which is where a lot of them are implemented in a different mode that OpenAI just straight up won't support, because you can't host them anywhere in a way that it can access it. So they're simply just not available to it. And my attitude is, I want to get as many tools going as I can. We can't expect every single company out there to immediately publish one that matches the full specification. So in a lot of ways, you've either got to take it on and improve it yourself, or you've got to say, okay, I will make up for the deficiencies in these by providing a layer over the top that handles those things that it's missing. And so my personal opinion is that MCPs are going to be so popular with non-technical users because it gives them power they didn't previously have. Like, developers have always been able to access APIs and do things with them, but developers have not been able to say, okay, I can actually build a fairly complex system by giving myself access to these 5 tools. And if I have those 5 tools, I can then create procedures that will get the data from here, send it here and update this system over here, and then send me a report or something like that. And that's going to be really possible really soon. So I think that the providers being able to get a simple way to host them where the user just doesn't even have to think about it. It's not like, hey, add your MCP, just enter the URL, the credentials method, and the secret key and the user token and the refresh token time and all this sort of stuff. Like, no one wants to do that, and it isn't necessary. And I know that because we've got a better way of doing it. So I think that the OpenAI has been sort of lazy on that front, and it's not going to be the solution that takes off. The solution that takes off is going to be people able to click, I want that, I want that, I want that, like the App Store. You install them, you go through an auth process to allow it what data you want to, or what methods you want to allow it to use, and then the AI just knows how to use it. And there's a layer of prompting there that makes sure it's effective. So I think that it's cool that they're going in that direction, but it's not a complete solution what they have there now, not at all. And they're sort of more treating it like they're just adding integrations than they are a universal connector system, which is what it is.
And I think the other sort of caveat to it right now is it's just able to use these tools during the sort of deep research function. Like it can't use them anywhere else at the moment. I'm sure it will in the future, right?
Absolutely. It has to, because remember, not all of the tools are research-based. Like, we use those examples because they're pretty exciting, because no one wants to go through the painful task of like doing all this research and putting it together. And it's great that the AI can do that. But if you think about it, many of the exciting uses around MCP servers is what it can actually do. Like, we gave the phone call example, but it's like send an SMS, update a database, write out files to disk, and publish this to the web. The actual actions it's going to be able to take are actually just as exciting, especially if they're well researched and prepared actions, maybe with an approvals process. But you can't do that during a thinking step, because no one is going to trust it to just do what it wants. So the actual activities and doing things is just as important, I think, and if not more exciting than the research. There's also another element that I think is going to be really interesting, which is, we've talked about knowledge graph and the AI's ability to have memory before, but what we haven't spoken about is that in the MCP paradigm. Because if you think about it, some of the tools you could give the AI are simply, here's your memory. Like, your memory is an MCP server that has the ability for you to delete things, add things, search your memories, save an image in there, update it, summarize it, whatever. And that could be like quite an advanced database that the AI has access to. You could also give it the ability to have its own computer that it can run when it wants. Like, we've talked about computer usage before. You could also give it the ability to do text to speech, or like other things like that, like actual real world actualization things where it can take a photo on a webcam and see how the garden's going or whatever it is. So there's going to be very interesting combinations of tools you can give the AI to create a much more holistic AI assistant that can then have a lot more powers. And I think it's going to be genuinely interesting to see in this ongoing context how those AI agents evolve when given access to all of those things, and sort of a vague idea of like, here's all the stuff you can do, now here's your mission, and see how it combines all of those things to do stuff. And none of that is going to work purely in a thinking context like before it gets to work. Like, it's a very simplistic way of using it right now, is what I'm saying.
And I think also, just from the teaching users about this agentic workflow, working with an assistant where it's able to go off and do these tasks. Right now, personally, as I've experienced both of these, I much prefer the tool calling to happen sort of as part of it, sort of almost like talking to itself, like going off and doing things where I'm observing it. And just to know certain tool calls can have the approval where I've got to let it continue. That feels a lot safer to me. But then there's other contexts like research or search where I don't really care. Like, I'm just like, you go do your thing. So I think both have their merits, but to me, as you say, the most exciting thing is it having actual agency where it can go and do work on your behalf, not just go and fetch sources. I think the other interesting topic around this is really this idea of it being able to populate its own context as it needs. Like the old methodology is really go and shove everything in, right? Like shove, all the Jira tickets in or whatever it may be. And then, we were relying on RAG before, then it got to bigger context windows, but even those context windows max out at a certain point. So letting it determine, I need to go get this chunk for my context right now. I need to call this tool to get a bit more context about this, and then letting it decide to cherry pick and manage its own context seems like it will also be more effective than you just shoving everything in every time.
Exactly. And I feel like this is the answer to the RAG, the retrieval augmented generation problem, because this is a problem I think that never really fully got solved. Because say you've got an assistant that has access to 3 PDFs that have your company culture, rules and guidelines that it needs when it answers a question, right? In the past, there's 2 ways to do that. You either have retrieval augmented generation, where there's a query that will get a series of summaries based on a search and put them in the context, or with the larger context models, you just shove it all in, just put it in every time and say, you must take this into account. The problem is both methods have their downsides. The search method loses fidelity on the data because it's only just giving summaries. And the shove it in every time method will mean that the AI will get fixated on things that don't really matter. And it seems to take great pleasure in bringing everything back to its source material. My AI agent will always be like, oh, I know how you love Python functions or whatever, as a joke when you ask it about some other thing. It's just not relevant to the discussion. Whereas in the paradigm that you're talking about, where, hey, look, you've got these tools available when you need them, but also you should take them into account when appropriate, then it's much more able to have discretion around when to get that information and when to know it needs all of it. It absolutely must take all of this into consideration in this scenario. So therefore, use the method that gets all of it. And in a scenario where it's like, hey, I better just quickly check my memories to see that there's nothing relevant here. And if there's nothing, well, it just does nothing, and that's fine.
Yeah, and I think a good example of this at work is, as we recorded in the last sort of 24 hours, pretty tragically, a Boeing 787 Dreamliner went down with Air India. And of course, there's a lot of good information out there about what sort of happened. And then there's also some misinformation, and, just it's like the internet, right? It's toxic. It's running wild. So what I think that this does is, from an information gathering point of view, you can imagine right now, your workflow today is sort of look at maybe X, look at some new mainstream media news articles and read them. So you tend to build a complete picture in your head, right? Like your own natural picture. But what I've noticed with the tool calling and the sources that you prefer is you can then send it off and say, go figure out maybe what the cause of this crash is, or what the current consensus is, or just what happened. You just want a broad spectrum, or the most sort of somewhat, I would argue, neutral analysis of what's happening. And you can see this being really important for businesses, for the media. I think it could be most threatening to journalists, in the sense that, almost threatening in a positive way, where it goes back to them having to actually source facts versus just
especially
sit
since
and write.
most journalists get all their knowledge from X anyway now. And it's like, oh, a user on Instagram said this, and that's now the news.
Yeah. But also the inverse of that is, you start to realize the power of X in terms of being valuable for this new media world. So what I did, I actually asked o3-pro with tool calling to go off and research extensively this incident and come back to me and write in the style of a Wall Street Journal article. And then what I did is I compared the output to the mainstream media articles. So BBC, Wall Street Journal, to just, and this is completely, my own test here, and my personal opinion. I wanted to see which article, in my opinion, was the most factual and comprehensive, given what I know, and didn't treat me like a dummy or be opinionated. And I mean, it's probably obvious what I'm going to say, but the the researched article by my AI assistant that was then turned into a page that I can look at that's written in a Wall Street Journal style news article. And I'll link to this in the show notes below. It's just so much more comprehensive and better to read. And it feels like how maybe I sound like member berries here, but it does feel like before at least in my opinion, the news went so far left and right, it does feel like the middle again somewhat. Like it's just reporting facts and it's not opinions or speculation or clickbait. It's just like, here is what we know. And there's a lot of good YouTubers out there that cover news independently now. And a lot of people listen to those because they know it's just experts in an industry that just give facts and their take based on dedicated experience. And so it felt closer to that experience to me than reading a news article where it's someone personally who knows a fair bit about aviation. You read them and you're like, what? This is not even close to reality.
Exactly. And I think you have the additional advantage, and maybe this does introduce bias, but you can curate your own sources, right? You can say, these are my trusted sources. So if you do want bias in your favor, you can get that too. But if you don't, you can have a variety of sources.
But don't you think that's good in a way, being able to control those sources? And to me, then the sources, which are in this case MCPs, become the future sort of trade mechanism of data. Like that to me is the new business model. It mightn't be the journalist writing the article. It might just be his Reuters MCP with all the facts that their journalists on the ground have found out.
I strongly believe this is going to be the future. And I think there's going to be an entire economy around it where you pay for access to these worlds, where you get trusted data, or at least, sources of data that you can build into a system you trust, and getting this quality curated data as input to your AI models through MCPs.
A good example of that, and I think probably one of the earliest examples, is this financial data set that we've been playing around with quite a bit. It's really just a GitHub project, right? An MCP server for financial data sets. And it's got a bunch of available tools like getting income statements, balance sheets, cash flow statements, all that kind of stuff about companies that gives the AI access to retrieve those from good sources, crypto prices, things like that. And then you can see on their website here, financialdatasets.ai. This is like a whole category of business. It's almost like, I would argue, you're seeing the future of what will happen to SaaS companies or like how they'll be disrupted.
Yeah, and just think about all of the different data sets that are out there. Like even governments could publish economic data. You could get interest rate data, finance data, like commodities data. There's so many different sources of information that are going to be incredibly valuable in this tool calling context, and not even necessarily going straight into the LLM. Like it might be it sources data from this one and then puts it into the spreadsheet module, which then produces a spreadsheet, which is then used as input to another model, and those kind of things. The different and disparate sources of data it could get to answer its question can be absolutely massive. And when they're designed in an interface where the AI knows exactly what the data types are and exactly what to expect in the response, that's a lot more valuable than just like copying and pasting massive text dumps from websites, or like crawling the web and just hoping and trusting that whatever you crawled is relevant and isn't being manipulated against you. And that's the reason why I'm personally excited about paid sources, because if you pay for it, they've got far less incentive to manipulate the data for some dodgy reason, right? Like if you're paying for it, it reduces the likelihood that it's bad. And so I think that there can be a really, really exciting market for that. And that's just the research side. I think, as you know, there's the other side, which is what actions can I take? What abilities can I give to my AI agent by subscribing to services that provide them?
Yeah, and it's just like your stack of tools and your tune of tools and maybe your prompt tune on top of that's going to have a lot of value. But I also think it solves the context drift problem I bang on about all the time in these doom paths, because you're not chunking it all into the context, like you say, immediately. You're allowing it to go off when necessary, step by step, and go and fetch things. Okay, interpret that in line with what's going on. Okay, now I'm going to fetch this. Now I'm going to interpret it. And that process the model naturally takes, to me, tends to perform better than just chucking everything in the context and going like, decide on this horse race or whatever.
Yeah, and it almost forces it into a step-by-step logical process in terms of thinking, especially if it's instructed to verify using the tools you have available. Because then it's like, okay, I better check that my logic here is correct based on this data source. And I think that that's going to lead to much better outcomes, even with existing models without modification. And I think this is why we were talking earlier about a model like O3 that's faster and has very strong tool calling abilities may actually end up rating better than other models that aren't as proficient at calling tools. And I think that it's going to become an increasingly important part of models is their ability to use what's given to them to make themselves better.
Yeah, and this is sort of why the current set of models probably will feel better in a couple of months as these tools are available and applied to these models in different ways.
Yeah, like they're currently fist fighting with each other, but then you just give one like a bronze sword and you're like, oh, suddenly it's like smashing these guys. Like it's so much better. But then the other one gets what's the next one? Like a netherite sword or something. And, and so I think that's what it is. It's like giving them weapons and like whoever wields the weapons better is going to win. And I would argue that, like, I think you could take Gemini 2.5 Pro now with no tools and O3, just O3, not even O3 Pro with tools. And I think it would beat it for a lot of questions. And I don't just mean like, what's the weather going to be like tomorrow? But I mean like, a research task or like a thinking task where it just has more information available.
And these data sets, why I think they're so valuable is we were talking earlier about these like custom news articles where you tune it the way you want to read an article, right? And so if you think about the future business models of news organizations, you can imagine them just supplying like raw notes from journalists or like in-field facts or some sort of like JSON object in an API of like, here are the current facts about that particular tag topic. And then your AI agent or assistant is then interpreting that for you and formatting it in a way that's suitable for you. But I just think this is where the interface change is so dramatic because you're not going to the news website and being disrupted by these silly ads and all this nonsense. If you're willing to pay for those facts and you deem it valuable to whatever you're doing, which, look, it's debatable. People still not want to pay. But if they do pay for that, they're going to get a much better product and be able to curate that experience and honestly probably be more informed and more intelligent than anything else. I don't actually see it as a negative thing.
Yeah, and it doesn't just have to be journalism. Like there's so many elements in life and business where you need to sort of gather information from a bunch of sources before you make a call. And it's just time consuming. And it's like the trade-off of how long do I spend on this versus solving my problem. And so I think that having a really fast and convenient way to do that doesn't involve you having to do all of those steps when you're busy or on your phone or whatever it is, makes it far more likely you're actually going to do it and therefore get better research and better outcomes for what you do. So over time, I imagine people will just prefer that interface because they don't have to go after all this different stuff. The example I've got is whenever I cook now, I just use an AI agent to get the recipe. So I don't have to read someone's life story before I get the information. And it's far superior. And like that is without, like one of the examples I think is even better than my cooking example, which is like top notch, but this one's better, is imagine a source that is like a university library with old digitized books that are available nowhere else. I know a guy in Austria who works in like the Stack, remember out of like James Bond GoldenEye where there was like the Stack was one of the levels. And it's where they have like all of these old manuscripts and books that have never been digitized, never been put online. And people literally go to this place just to like access these books and this knowledge for research. Now, imagine all of that digitized and then available as an MCP. So you've got a source of information that just simply isn't available anywhere else. It's the same as old newspaper articles. Imagine newspaper articles from throughout history. Like every single newspaper article from 1900 to now, from the one newspaper, available as a searchable MCP as a data source in your research. Like, that could be absolutely and like just unbelievably amazing in terms of what you're able to accomplish. It's the same with journals. Like, in our testing of MCPs, we've been using research journals, and when you ask it questions, it's able to quite readily go through and find you relevant sources to continue your research, or in some cases access them. Now, a lot of journals are proprietary. I imagine subscription services through MCP where you're like, okay, the AI might even say, hey, I'd really love to buy subscriptions to these 3 because they keep coming up in my research. And if we can get the articles themselves, we're a step further to solving our problem. Now, imagine that. If you're doing hardcore research for something and you're able to get all of this historical information from multiple sources, quality published services that you pay for, so you have the right to use the data, it's going to be just immense what can be done in like just a few minutes.
Yeah, to me, this is $1 billion opportunity for people to build these like great MCPs, like and for all different. Whether it's you go and build them on behalf of companies and do a deal with them, or whether it's actual businesses that are sitting on the knowledge, this seems like the economic delivery method to me.
Yes, and that's what I would do if I was one of these organizations who was sitting on a bunch of proprietary knowledge, or I just had access to something. Even if other people had access to it too, but I was the first one to make it available through this method as a paid service, I think people are just going to lap it up. Like, can you imagine the announcements where they're like, oh, there's now an MCP for every old newspaper. There's now an MCP for all of these textbooks, like that just haven't been, they might be online, but they're like images or some shit, So hang on. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's going to be sources of knowledge that, if put in this massively convenient format and available as an MCP to your AI agents, are going to be just so valuable. And I really feel like it's going to be a sort of like gold rush to see who can provide these services, because everyone's going to be subscribed to them. I really think, like you said earlier, MCP stack, people are going to be like, it'll be us. Like, we'll be sitting here with our like 20 views of our thing, and there'll be some guy with 150,000 who's like, here's my MCP stack. Like, oh, why you need these top 5 MCPs in your stack?
Yeah, you'll never believe, shock face.
Yeah, exactly.
How many MCPs I used.
I subscribe to the New York Times MCP for my unbiased facts. Like, it's going to be that kind of thing.
Mr. Beast like spent $1 billion on MCP tokens to cure world peace or something.
Yeah, exactly. How I used MCP tokens to purify water in Africa.
So I do want to run this experiment with you, and it's an interesting experiment. I heard a lot of rumors that o3-pro really excelled at creative writing and narrative writing and just writing in general. And I always find writing hard to test because it's quite subjective, and also, it kind of depends on the prompt. And sometimes a model will put out something where you're like, this is incredible as a story. And then other times the same model will put out total trash. So I think it's hard to look at the benchmark and say like, okay, this is better, because it's all subjective. So I thought, why not do a subjective test and use you as the guinea pig?
Okay, great.
So I've prepared 3. So to clarify the prompt, I asked 3 different models: Claude Sonnet 4, Gemini 2.5 Pro, and o3-pro. I said to them, write a space-themed version of Count of Monte Cristo.
Oh, you know your audience.
Yeah.
This is great.
So write the synopsis on the back of the book that you would put to get my brother, you, to buy the book. And
this is great.
But then
I have the full text of the Count of Monte Cristo printed on a jumper.
So this is good. So then the next bit of the test is then I said, okay, now you've got to write the first couple of paragraphs of the first chapter. And I've ran these through ElevenLabs v3, so it all ties together beautifully. And you have to listen to them, and I hope the audience will listen too.
And pick the models. This is like on Dude Perfect, where they had to pick like where the fries were from, like, McDonald's or Wendy's or whatever.
Yeah, so I'm curious if you pick o3-pro to begin with.
Okay. Oh man, this is a lot of pressure. I need to take notes. Hang on.
But I genuinely want to see which you prefer, right? And so we're going to have to really listen here, because these clips they're not short. But if you bear with us, I do think all of them are quite compelling. And I have my favorite. I already know my favorite. And
okay.
I purposely bamboozled myself with the file names. So I didn't know at first, and then I re-figured out what they were based on the transcript. So I picked mine blind test as well. So I'm just curious what you'll come up with.
Okay, and what did you rate them on? Or am I just going like, would I read it?
Which book would I continue to want to read over the others? And I think that's a really good assessment, right?
And am I ranking them or just picking my favorite?
You don't have to rank them. I think just pick your favorite. But the one thing I would say that helped me is I would maybe take a note after I play it to you. So that and I would encourage you to do this if you're on your desk listening or whatever. As we play them, maybe write your...
Stop your car, pull over.
Yeah, pull
get
over.
Get a notepad out. Take this seriously for
Tell
once.
your kids to shut up in the back of the car.
Can you tell that kid in the back to shut up?
and then get out your notepad, because everyone carries one of them, and write some notes as you go. You know, maybe out of 10 or whatever it is, just so you can compare them at the end. All right, I'll stop talking. Here we go.
Chapter 1. Event Horizon. The cell lights flickered in uneasy harmony with the gravitational tides outside, casting ripples of shadow across Elias Voss's face. He lay, strapped to a polymer cot no wider than his shoulders, feeling each shudder of Scylla 9's orbit around the black hole below. Every 6 minutes, a bone-deep lurch reminded him how close annihilation waited. Somewhere in the bowels of the prison moon, a siren wailed, a falling tone lament that never quite reached silence before beginning again, like a heartbeat for the damned. Voss kept his eyes fixed on the ceiling's cracked plating as he recited vectors in his mind, refusing to surrender one more thought to fear than necessary. Momentarily, the lock seal chirped, and a blast door irised open. A single guard entered, helmet visor opaque, and pulse rifle idle at hip. But Voss knew the real threat was the drone that hovered at the threshold, its surgical arm gleaming with tranquilizer needles. Today's ration tray skidded across the floor to stop beneath the cot. On its surface, etched by countless fingernail scratches from inmates before him, was a crude star chart, intersecting arcs, forgotten systems, and a set of coordinates circled so many times the metal blurred. Voss's pulse quickened. The cartographer's legend was no myth. It waited for the one prisoner still stubborn enough to believe escape from both Scylla 9 and his own grave was possible. Chapter.
Okay,
Wow.
So that's the first one.
Do you want my comments now or at the end?
Yeah, no, I think let's do it as we go, just so we get your sort of raw feedback.
So firstly, I think Andy Weir should quit his job. He's the guy who wrote The Martian and Hail Mary. It sounds a lot like Hail Mary, like that, the way he writes and like the sort of waking up on a bed and all that sort of stuff. And secondly, I'm so stupid. It took me to like 3/4 in to get the Count of Monte Cristo references, like, you know, being in a cell, the map, like that kind of stuff. But that's damn compelling. Like I kind of didn't want it to stop. Like I was genuinely enjoying that. That's going to be very, very hard to beat. I want to know what happens.
My only criticism of this one is, and all of them really, is that it still takes the instruction a bit too literal. Like it's turned the synopsis of the book into like a story in the first, like you would never as an author unveil so much in the first chapter.
You reckon? I thought it was okay because like what did we learn? That, you know, he's on some sort of prison ship. They're orbiting a black hole. There's drone guards with tranquilizers and stuff like that. And there's a map, which means there's going to be treasure. You know, like...
yeah, I guess it does draw you in. It does draw you in, yeah.
I mean, the thing it missed from the Count of Monte Cristo was like, it took him a while to get to the point to find out about the treasure, and it didn't have like him being like wrongfully accused of a crime, blah, blah, blah. But it doesn't have to be the same. Like, I don't know. I thought that was excellent. I really, really liked it. It's going to be hard to beat. That's my number one so far.
Okay. It's not going to be easy. So the next one I'll play here. So this is, again, completely different model, exact same prompts for all of these.
Chapter 1. The Edge of Trust. The warning klaxon should have been Darius Kane's first clue that his life was about to end. It cut through the bridge of the Meridian's edge like a blade through silence, its harsh metallic shriek drowning out the steady hum of the ship's fusion drives. Kane's hand froze halfway to the tactical display, the encrypted data chip containing Admiral Voss's intelligence still warm between his fingers. Around him, his crew, men and women he'd served with for 3 years, fought beside in the Proxima Rebellion, trusted with his life a dozen times over, moved with the fluid precision of a well-oiled machine. Too fluid, too precise, as if they'd rehearsed this moment while he slept. "Captain," Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen called from the communications station, her voice steady despite the alarm's wail. "We're receiving a priority transmission from Fleet Command. Admiral Blackwood himself." She turned to face him, and in her dark eyes, Kane saw something that made his blood turn to ice water in his veins. Pity. "Sir, you need to hear this."
Okay, that's number 2.
That was shit. I hated it. That was cliched drivel. Yeah, no, that's a 0 out of 10.
Okay. Interesting. Didn't draw you in at all?
No, not at all. It sounded like something you would write in high school. It was really bad.
Okay. Mental note. So number 2, not so good. Now, moving on to number 3.
Chapter 1. The Captain and the Cage. The Star Chaser sang its usual song of arrival, a low, resonant thrum from the grav plates that vibrated up through the command chair and into Kalen Kor's bones. It was a familiar, comforting hum, the sound of a job well done. Outside the viewport, the velvet black was pinned with the diamond dust of distant stars. But his focus was on the jewel that grew larger with every passing second. Cygnus X1's station, a glittering spindle of light and commerce. Another perfect run. The nav logs were clean, the cargo of rare isotopes secure, and the docking sequence was a familiar, comforting dance. The word captain tasted sweet on his tongue, a promotion all but guaranteed upon his return. But it was Alani's face that truly filled his mind's eye, her smile, brighter than any nebula, waiting for him on the observation deck. "Sir!" a voice crackled over the bridge intercom, pulling him from his reverie. It was Jax, his comms officer. "Priority 1 message coming through. Fleet Command encryption. They're patching it directly to your private channel." Kalen's brow furrowed. Fleet Command rarely bothered with pilots directly, especially at the end of a milk run like this. That was what port authorities and corporate liaisons were for. He toggled the receiver. The voice that came through was clipped and impersonal. An anonymous drone from the station's security hub. He was to bypass the commercial docking bay and proceed directly to Auxiliary Hangar 7, a sterile, high-security berth typically reserved for military vessels and diplomatic envoys. He was to be met by a security detail. No reason was given. A flicker of unease, cold and sharp, cut through his triumphant warmth. It was irregular, but it was a direct order, and Kalen Kor had built his entire career on following.
Right, that one cut off abruptly. There was like one more word.
So
I don't know why.
that one is way more true to the Count of Monte Cristo. It's like almost just like taking the plot directly out of it. Like they're returning on a ship from a mission. He gets ordered to go see the guy who's going to betray him because he's carrying a letter for Napoleon, like all that sort of stuff. That one was way truer to the actual plot of the Count of Monte Cristo. However, it was like a bit dry, like a bit it didn't draw me in like the first one did. I think the first one as like a sci-fi drama was way more exciting than any of the others. I think the third one was the best at sticking to the mission, like as in make a space themed Count of Monte Cristo. So I think I'm going to go 1, 3, and then a far distant 2. 2 was garbage.
So just to clarify, like just to remind everyone listening, the first prompt was write an introduction for a book that is like the Count of Monte Cristo but set in space. It should draw the reader in and sell them on the book. They should not be able to put it down. Then when it writes its response to that, I then trigger it again with another prompt. Okay, now write the first 2 paragraphs of the actual book, like chapter 1. So then that's what we then converted to the audio. So which model do you think was which?
Oh, okay. So that's going to be hard. So my choices are o3-pro, Gemini 2.5, and Sonnet 4.
So, sorry, just to clarify, you think the first one was...
No. I'm saying, are they my candidates?
Yeah, so you got o3-pro, Sonnet 4, and then Gemini 2.5 Pro, yeah.
Okay. So I reckon Sonnet 4 was number 2, the one I didn't like. I think that Gemini 2.5 was number 1, the one I liked the most. And I think o3-pro was the last one, the one I liked second, which is the one that stuck closest to the plot of the book.
To me, like, this tells me how much you use the models, because you do have a pretty good intuition for them, at least Sonnet. So Sonnet, you are correct, was number 2. Pretty bad. That's Sonnet 4. And what's surprising to me is when we do the rap battles, it by far is the best always. Like, it's so good at writing rap battle tracks. But,
so I was wrong on the other 2.
So yeah, you were incorrect on the other 2. So the best one, number 1, is o3-pro.
Wow. Yeah. And I would think it was markedly better. I should have gone with my instinct, thinking that's the best model and it would do the best in the thing. The only reason I said it for the last one is I thought it was better at instruction following, which I guess Gemini 2.5 is. So damn, I wish I had my time over.
It sort of is, but like yes, it is better at instruction following in that regard, but I think what the user really is implying with the prompt, or at least what I thought I was implying, is like base it on that, but don't actually like recreate the exact story in space.
Exactly.
Gemini.
And I think it's a great point because like you want that, like when you're doing a task like that, you want creativity. It's not like just do a 1-for-1 ciphering of it and just change the words for space. Just like search and replace the word, like C with space.
Yeah, and for those listening, if you listen in a place where you can leave a comment like YouTube, do drop a comment. Like, which do you think was the best? Maybe
you can start driving
disagree
again as well if you're on the way to school.
Yeah, you can tell your kids they can resume talking, put away that paper notepad, and get on with your life. But so like honestly, I think naturally I picked number 1, like the same order as you.
Yeah.
And I'm not just saying that, I truly did. But I thought number 1 was just so far better. It wasn't even, it wasn't
I also thought the voice delivery of it was better too. I know that isn't really a factor, but like, I think my order's the same for how good the voice was in each as well.
Yeah. It worked better with that one. Keep in mind, in ElevenLabs, I did use that feature where it decides on the emotes to put in and where to put them. And so there's maybe a little bit of bias creeps in there, but I still tried to interpret it based on the storytelling and that sort of vision I create in my mind versus the voice. Like, I wasn't judging the voice when I heard it. I was the first one, I was like, I actually genuinely would keep reading this story. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
Maybe I should do a series like the Count of Monte Cristo with this plot and we keep it going.
I just so regret. I was so close to getting that right. And, I've only got 33.3%.
It's still, I think I thought you might have lent into Sonnet being the winner. Like, this is going to, this is going to be that.
I did think back that you always said it's better at creative writing, but I just knew that it was going to be the bad one because I knew Gemini 2.5 wouldn't do it bad, and I thought o3-pro has more time to think and get it right. So I just thought there's no way it's going to produce drivel like that second one.
So the one thing I should have added to the test is actually done Sonnet 3.5 because I think they've neutered a lot of that stuff in Sonnet 4 in the guise of like, we want to be better at coding, right?
Yeah.
And so they've sort of like degraded other parts of the model.
I think this should be the new way of us judging model. Classic literature space rewrites, judging panel. Like that was fun.
It's not a bad way, and it translates well to the primary medium that people listen, which is audio. So it tends to work a lot better than
yeah, we could just become like a sensual story station. It would be very interesting.
Also contrasted with the rap battles, it makes no sense why these would be our two tests. It's like one's
Although I
pretty
imagine
serious.
it tends to polarize our audience. Some people hate the rap battles, so they might also hate the literature section.
Yeah, look, we're never going to win, I think.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, so that anyway, I thought that's a really interesting. What I found strange about that experiment though is this. Again, in my limited experience, and I do want to road test this thing more, I don't think it's a great coding model like almost all OpenAI models right now. I think they've just, and for whatever reason, there might be a strategy behind it, but I just don't think they're the best. And I know a lot of people will be like, but Codex has its own model and it's better. Like, it's not being used in reality. Like, no one's using it in Cursor or any of these other big IDEs. So like I win that argument. I'm sorry. But I think for cutting through a hard problem, great model to occasionally rely on for certain things. Clearly for writing news articles and stories and all these things, like, my kids are going to cost me a fortune now calling o3-pro to write a Batman story, but I know it'll be better. So I'm very impressed with its writing capability. Its code writing capability, great at cutting through a problem and cutting through the noise. But if you just want raw output, it's not a great model.
Yeah.
So, all right, we have covered ElevenLabs V3, the o3 pricing drama, them dropping their pants on pricing. o3-pro, I'm excited about it. I think it gets to that point of the show where we got to go back to the boom factor here. How many booms are we talking?
Yeah, I think pretty high. I think maybe like a 7 out of 10, I think, because I still think for me the time it takes is going to limit my usage of it. However, its ability to call tools and give these really high quality responses, I think my early horse racing results plus that story make me want to give it much more of a chance throughout the week to solve my problems. And I think now that I work in a sort of tabbed asynchronous kind of world, I'm a lot more inclined to set it about problems and just leave it and then just wait till the ding comes through and check on it. So I think, maybe 7.5, and I'll give it a real run this week on real world stuff that I need done and report back next week, because definitely I'm not seeing quite the excitement around like the new Sonnet. Opus is basically unusable because of Amazon for us. And so, the Anthropic's really sort of gone down in my estimation. I'm still using Gemini 2.5 a lot, but I think this OpenAI update, like with the lower cost, the faster O3, and this o3-pro available at a sort of middle reasonable price, is actually getting me excited about them again. And I think it's they went through this phase where it was all hype and no substance, whereas here they've just given substance out of nowhere. And I think it always just helps in terms of people who focus on the practical side of the models.
I think o3-pro is a good model. At its core, there's something good about it that I can see myself using it again. And as you said, like, they didn't try and gatekeep o3-pro into that crazy plus plan or whatever at $200 a month that most people it's out of reach for. They do have it available in the AI. They are letting developers access at a reasonable price point. I think they needed to drop the price of o3 because it just wasn't interesting at the price that it was at. So now with now that it's on par with a Gemini 2.5 Pro, it starts to make you consider using it a lot more, and therefore maybe you start to enjoy that model and can extract more out of it.
One other thing we didn't mention as well is that we didn't test vision, and it's my fault because I thought it didn't support vision, so we never got around to actually trying it. So I think that's another thing throughout the week we need to try, is see, does it perform better on vision? And in particular, is it really good at vision when it comes to, say, operating a computer or those finer details, which we've seen other models have issues with? So I think that given its ability to think the way it does, we may actually see better results in vision as well. And so that's something I'd really like to put to the test.
Yeah, for me, a model like o3-pro that's still operated in a chat level speed, like that speed that you can put up with the ability to do async tool calling in a 1 million context, and then mix in the sort of tune from Gemini with code. That to me, I hope, is GPT-5. Like, I kind of hope that's what it is. That's what I think's needed, like bringing these all together, like, because there's something really nice here brewing. So yeah, I'm not sure about a boom factor from me. Like, it's sort of hard to say until we play around with it more, especially with the tool calling. The thing I would question you on, though, with Sonnet or even Opus, provided the bandwidth's there, is I do think there is something, and I mentioned this last week, around the async tool calling, where when you experience that and then you have to go back to an o3-pro, which chugs through it slower, for most tasks, like checking email or adding a calendar invite or doing an operation in accounting software or something like that as part of a daily workflow, I think that it's like a workhorse model at that point, where you're just like Sonnet is a good workhorse model.
Sonnet is the only one I've seen consistently and aggressively use the parallel tool calls, that's for sure. And that includes over Sonnet 3.5 and 3.7. Sonnet 4 is the only one that seems to go all in on it. And so I think that is a very interesting factor.
But honestly, my total takeaway is what a good time in LLMs and AI in general. I know people feel like things are stagnant. Someone in the week on our Discord posted a thing about, come on, do something, that meme where he's poking a rock. And I do get that feeling, because I think that it felt before like I think we're just so used to this stuff now. Like when Google VO3 or whatever came out, people were arguably really excited. But I think, like all those things, it always dies down, and then there's that reality check of like, this is just a preview of the future. It's not actually something that's that useful right now. But I do think these models, as we increasingly add MCPs, like we're about to go through, and I know we keep hyping it, we'll deliver soon. But it's a paradigm shift. Like it's an async, different world, and it's coming, and it is exciting. And these models are the models that will power it.
Yeah, agreed. And I think that's all everyone will be talking about soon, is the mix of tools they're using and how best to get them working in orchestration. I really think that'll be everyone's focus. It's not going to be like, which is the best chat model anymore.
All right. Thanks again for listening and all of your support. Please do tell us which you preferred in the book test. Maybe you completely disagree with our opinions on that. Although I think it's fair to say, I can't imagine people disagreeing that heavily.
No, my opinion's objectively right, I think.
All right. We'll see you next week. Goodbye.